Hey everyone, I'm Leslie, and welcome to my channel, Books, Gurrs, and Purrs. Today I'm going to be talking about David Chang's Eat a Peach. Most people know him from his restaurant, Momofuku. I know him from the Netflix show Ugly Delicious. I love culinary food shows, so that's kind of my thing. So this memoir is told in not a linear fashion per se. It kind of jumbles around, but it does start off from this from the author finishing college, landing himself an office job that ultimately he's unhappy in, and it's actually his depression that catapults him towards finding a career in the culinary world. The themes that are discussed in this book are family dynamics, chosen family, mental health, toxic work environment, workaholism, and the evolution of being a chef and the restaurant world. There's a visual technique that the author uses in one of his chapters that's reminiscent of the book House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, where he uses black ink to tell the current story that he's writing, but then he'll use the word strike option to make it clear what he's unhappy with that he's done in the past, and then he'll use a red text to have a dialogue to talk about his past behaviors. And I feel like this was a really effective technique for the author to be transparent about his past behaviors and take responsibility, reflect on those actions, and then insert a healthier point of view, kind of showing the evolution of him as a person. There are some parts of the books where the storyline will take place around the author and the dynamics that he has with other people in his life. And I felt like I really appreciated that when he is talking about himself, he's very candid, but he's very delicate, and it seems like you could tell he's taking care of the other people that he's writing about in a way that feels, it comes across guarded, but I feel like this is coming from a place of someone that doesn't want to really speak on someone else's behalf and wants to protect the fact that although he's someone writing a book, it's not the other person writing a book. So he tries his best to be candid and just vulnerable from his point of view, while also, I don't know, you could tell like there's something missing, but I felt like I appreciated it because it always seems to be the other person in the story that he's trying to be. I don't know, it is, the word protective comes up to mind the way that I read it. Throughout the book, the author has all these gems that I found, and I think this comes from the fact that the author has a degree in like a particular religious study. So on like page 61, the author writes, "You simply can't rely on common wisdom in the kitchen. Most of it is built on half-truths and outdated assumptions. Be open to every idea." So I feel like the author here and there will say something that is, I feel like it might be unintentionally profound. But for instance, for that quote, I felt as though what he's saying really applies to life and not just a philosophy on how to move around in the kitchen. But with that point, the fact that at times it feels as though he's saying things that are unintentional gems or unintentional insights leads me to my criticism. There's a point that I didn't really know if I was going to talk about, but there are just moments in the book where there are like some head scratchers, and by the time I reached the end of the book, there's just a couple of head scratchers that happen to the point where I realize I'm probably going to have to talk about it in some fashion. While reading the book, I really connected with what Chef Chang and Hucking Baca are saying with their food. For instance, Baca grew up with Mexican food, and Chef Chang grew up with Korean food, Japanese food. He has a French background as far as his formal training. And so I felt like they made it clear that all these foods should be celebrated. When someone makes food, it shouldn't just necessarily have to represent one particular culture. That in life, you're influenced by so many different cultures, and that should also be celebrated. But as I went on reading the book, I felt like some of the elements that the author talked about in his book kind of contradicted what he was trying to say at the same time. As an example, the author wrote a cookbook, and he uses gochujang sauce, which is a fermented chili sauce, in the recipe, but he changes the name to dragon sauce purposefully. And the reason for him doing that is because, well, the way he says it is something like, so he writes in the book, it has the absolutely awful and ridiculous name, Red Dragon Sauce. I knew that lazy people would copy the recipe without bothering to check whether Red Dragon Sauce was a real thing. To this day, I'll see it show up on menus from time to time. It always makes me laugh. So here's the thing. The reason why I find this to be a bit contradictory is that calling gochujang sauce is a very specific choice that he made, and he put it in his own cookbook. And yes, one of the reasons why someone might use the name dragon sauce is because they're lazy, according to him. But I also feel like when you put something out in the world, there's like a responsibility that you have to what you're trying to teach people. And so it's not like it was something that he said in a conversation. He specifically wrote it in his own cookbook and gave it the wrong name. How can he guarantee when someone makes a recipe that requires fermented chili sauce that they're not calling it dragon sauce as an homage to him, because that's what he calls it in the cookbook? I just feel like he's creating something with a scenario in which he only sees a reusing of his teachings as a form of laziness, when I feel like he was the one that put it into the world in the first place. So that was a bit of a head scratcher between what he's trying to say philosophically about, making a dish, and it exists and it carries all these different cultures, and that should be just as celebrated, but then also creating a sticking point regarding the actual name of a sauce. But then he was the one that put the misinformation out in the world in the first place. It's just like, I don't really understand what he's doing with that. Like, I don't understand the chuckle part of it. I don't know. So that was a little bit of a head scratcher. And again, I didn't think I was going to talk about that. But then later on in the book, in terms of what you bring to the plate, there's a dish, and I couldn't find, I was trying to relook through the book to find this point, but I couldn't find it right now. There's a specific traditional Korean dish that he uses the foundation of that Korean dish with all its tradition, and then recreates it in his own kitchen to sell in his own restaurant, which is fine, that's great. But then in talking about the customer, he says that he finds it funny to think about the customers that are going to eat his food enjoy that dish and then go to a traditional Korean restaurant, order that dish, and it's going to be something completely different. So I feel like at times he's laughing at the consumer, which is a little bit, it's disheartening because I thought the whole point of creating the food that he's making is to create a bridge between cultures and the customer through food. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea, but then he kind of is tearing down that whole idea while laughing at the consumer. I don't know. I thought, wouldn't it be nice if someone came into a restaurant, enjoyed a dish so much that they're gonna want to try it somewhere else? Doesn't that also create a dialogue? Wouldn't I eat something, even if it's completely different, and be interested to learn more about that food and that culture? Why does it warrant a laugh or almost like looking down at the consumer because they're getting something different somewhere else? Like it seems like he's laughing at the surprise the customer is going to get. I didn't really understand that between wanting to connect, but then, you know, with a dragon sauce, it's like, I'm tricking you. Or with a traditional dish that he changed, it's like, isn't going to be funny that you're probably not going to like the original one. I don't know. Those two things kind of didn't like really sit well with me because I just feel like he's contradicting what he's trying to do with his food, and then trying to have some sort of control of the result that's beyond him, right? Because I feel like when you put food out, there's no guarantee how the message is going to be received, right? So I bring this all up to say that those are two little head scratcher moments until I reach towards the end of the book, where their author talks about a restaurant that failed. It was a chicken restaurant that he opened up. And with his restaurant and his food, he wanted to create a dialogue around racism that people in the Asian diaspora are subjected to. So he gets these posters from iconic films where they have characters that are playing very racist, stereotypical roles, and he's putting them up in his restaurant to create a dialogue about racism. And with his chicken sandwiches, he would have the wrapper of the sandwich say delicious, but it's spelled incorrectly to be as if someone had a particular Asian accent. And so for him, he's doing these things because he actually wants to prompt the consumer of his food to reflect on these very racist stereotypes, right? But in doing so, it's one thing for someone to want to have the conversation, but I don't know if that, it seems like that doesn't really work, and he knows it didn't work in that particular case, and he ended up changing the restaurant and closing it down. And this happens because in the book, and I'm getting to spoiler territory to basically discuss what was my sticking point. In the book, there are like two white customers, if I'm correct. Basically, these two customers, they buy the sandwich, they eat it, they notice the wrapper, and instead of like questioning or reflecting on how racist it is to make fun of someone's accent, instead they start putting on the accent and doing exactly what he doesn't want, which is to make fun of someone with an accent. I should say with a particular Asian accent, right? And I feel like this somehow seems reminiscent of what he did with the dragon sauce, right? I felt like he's putting something out into the world that is unintentionally reinforcing something negative. With dragon sauce, it's misinformation, and with the chicken wrappers, I felt like, well, you're just enforcing unintentionally this kind of like racist act. And so I think that's was a little bit frustrating, because although throughout the book the author discusses mental health, toxic behavior in the workplace, there is a thread going through by the towards the end of the book, or he'll reflect on things and he realizes that he's making the connections of where he started at and kind of what went wrong and what he needs to work on. But I felt like by the time we get to the part where he talks about his failed chicken restaurant, I didn't feel like the author was making enough of a connection between what he was doing with the dragon sauce, what he was doing with the discussion between a traditional Korean dish and one that he changes, right? He changes it for his for whatever he's trying to say philosophically, right, about bringing all these cultures together in a dish. Compounded with what happened with a chicken restaurant. I just didn't see him grabbing onto those other elements and saying, well, now I reflect on the dragon sauce, the dish that I made, and it all kind of led to my error with the chicken restaurant. I just didn't see him making those connections. So I don't know if it's that he genuinely doesn't see those connections, or if it just wasn't written that way and it should have been. So I can't even tell if this is like necessarily a literary criticism or if it's like a philosophical criticism. But either way, it seems like he's in conflict between the connections he makes and then I feel like almost sometimes what he actually believes. It's just very contradictory, and it kind of bothered me because, I don't know, it's one thing to see someone necessarily be lazy and make errors. It's another thing to actually contribute to that error. I hope what I just said makes sense. But that was the only thing that really kept sticking out to me in the book. Beyond that, I absolutely love the book. And I love that the author he embraces in a lot of other parts of the book his contradictions, and how it's through his failures over and over again that he finds success. And that's what I really love about what he writes, that it's not like he came out of the gate knowing what he was doing. It was just constantly through trial and error that he found what works for him, and I really enjoyed it. So I did enjoy the book. I'd say read it. I mean, I have a very brief, minor criticism, but beyond that, everything else I loved. I love the conversation about food. I love how he could talk about a particular philosophy about how a different chef will do a dish, and like throughout the book he has no real he generally feels like his criticism is valid, only to later on feel like, oh, there's something I just didn't understand. He's really willing to take responsibility for, I don't know, how he's behaved in the past. He talks about the Me Too movement and how what needs to change maybe in the culinary industry. I found that really fascinating. I enjoyed that it wasn't quite linear. He does kind of jump around a lot, but I didn't find it confusing. It all seemed valid because it seems like every chapter he is really trying to tackle a particular subject, so that does kind of warrant him jumping around. And this is definitely not your typical memoir, because it's just not about his life lived outside of a culinary world. The culinary world is so much of his own life. It's a big chunk of his life. So it's really ingrained together, and you really really learn about the evolution of him coming into his own, creating his own culinary voice. So I'd really recommend you pick up this book. It was a really, really lovely read, very enlightening about also his struggles with mental health. And with that, I will see you later.